The purist photographers out there may wish themselves back to the days where compositing and Photoshop photography was something that we complained about. Now we have AI images. I don't mind AI in the sense that it can help us in the industry finding solutions to medical problems that they have in that sector. I find it very problematic in the arts field, because art is something that we humans do. It's an expression of ourselves. The point is that it's made by humans for humans.
Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 399 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. Today's guest needs no introduction. With over 1 million Instagram followers and 250,000 YouTube subscribers, you probably are already familiar with the prolific work of Peter Iversen. Mas and I sat down and had one of the most enjoyable and entertaining conversations that I've had in a long time. This episode is packed. Before we get rolling, I want to mention this week's sponsor, Elements Magazine. If you're looking to take your photography to the next level, you need to check out Elements Photography Magazine. It's not just any magazine, it's packed with inspiration, education, and a supportive community can be found on their Facebook group. Each issue showcases breathtaking photography from amazing talent around the globe, including many former guests of this podcast. You'll find tips and techniques from the best in the business, dive into detailed tutorials, and stay on top of the latest industry trends. Most importantly, Elements shines a spotlight on diverse voices, giving underrepresented photographers a platform to share their unique perspectives. It's all about creativity and helping you discover your own artistic voice. Whether you're a professional or just starting out, Elements Magazine has something for you. Subscribe today and unlock a world of photography like never before. Head to elementsphotomag.com and join the awesome community of creators. Plus, use the code FSTOP15 for 15% off your subscription. See you there. Okay, let's get to this week's conversation with the legendary Peter Iversen. All right, Peter Iversen, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like your name has been recommended for the podcast about 472,000 times since I started the podcast in 2017. So I'm glad to finally make this happen.
Of course. Always.
Yeah, man. So, I think you're a huge inspiration to a lot of photographers, especially people who are getting their inspiration from Instagram and YouTube. And so I'm really excited to see where this conversation takes us today.
Me too.
Right on. Well, for people who aren't familiar with you, which I guess is maybe like 7 people in sub-Saharan Africa, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Matt Peter Iversen. I'm a Danish landscape photographer. I define myself generally broad as a fine art landscape photographer. I'm right now based in Copenhagen, but I am from Jutland, which is like the peninsula of Denmark, right in the middle. From a town called Silkeborg. I've been doing landscape photography a lot since probably 2014-15-ish. Before that, I was very much into portrait photography, a little bit more like stylistic portrait photography, and then also headshots. But since I went full-time in 2016 and started my YouTube channel there, it has just been like 99% landscape photography.
That makes sense. So what were you up to before you went full-time?
So I am an educated teacher, and I took my master's degree approximately at the same time where my interest for photography really exploded. So I more or less jumped directly from the end of my master's degree in 2014 into photography. I did have half a year where I worked in a photography store, and that is definitely not the same as actually doing landscape photography. I did try baby photography though, which was actually quite fun. But yeah, I'm educated teacher and have a master's degree in educational philosophy. So that was what I kind of did before that. In regard to my entrance into photography. I actually come from videography and video editing. I started out with video editing back in the days, like in the start zeros, where I found like downloadable movies, and then I could like extract the center channel from the movies, and then I only had the voiceover for the movies and the effects, and then I could put them together in like it's fan trailers, as you would call them, and in that way I brought that over to gymnastics, that I did for like, I don't know, 15, 20-ish years. And there I started filming gymnastics and with slow motion and all that stuff, which was really cool. And then when the Canon 550D came out, which was the first DSLR that could do slow motion, then I started to apply the slow motion to my gymnastics, and I also learned about what a RAW file was. And once I learned what a RAW file was, the rest is history.
That makes a lot of sense. And what was it that got you initially interested in landscape photography?
I think because my background is, as I said, just videography and stuff, but I also have like this nerdy side, as you would call it these days. It's probably more normal side, where you play a lot of World of Warcraft and you read fantasy novels and all that stuff. I've always been like big into fantasy, so I think it's especially the part about landscape photography with the big epic landscapes, in where I can like create this kind of like world building with the landscapes. It's also one of the things I've always said when it comes to my landscape photography, especially in the beginning. My point was not so much realism. It was more like I wanted to create something that for me was just wow. And this kind of world building and fantasy inspired landscapes is definitely what kind of got me into landscape photography to begin with, and especially Iceland did a lot of that for me, and the Faroe Islands, to some extent Britain too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Almost like you picked up Lord of the Rings, you watched Lord of the Rings movies, and you're like, I want to make pictures that look like that.
Exactly.
Right on. Well, let's talk a little bit more about your teaching background. So you've got your master's degree in educational philosophy. I'm curious how the training you've done through your master's degree has translated in your approach in becoming a full-time photographer.
Yeah, so specifically my master's degree in educational philosophy, it was more about philosophy than education. What I found a big interest in back then was epistemology, which is the science of knowledge. What is knowledge? And it was especially the spectrum between what is religious belief, faith, and so forth, up until what we call knowledge. Like, how do you know that you know something? Like that entire spectrum. And from a philosophical, educational perspective, what I learned about was basically all the big philosophers throughout history, especially Western history, and how their thoughts were on what is knowledge. How do you teach? When do you become adults or grown up, and all that stuff from being a kid and all the way up. But that was specifically what I trained myself on. So how it has benefited me as a landscape photographer is probably more indirectly, where I guess I can see through a lot of the bullshit that I see on social media. Let's say photographer X makes some kind of like statement that almost sounds like the objective truth. Then at the very least, I know that it's definitely not the objective truth, and it's more like a subjective opinion, which is fine. That is all good. But at the very least, something that has given me the training to see through trends and opinions and all that stuff. So there's like a tendency to say, back in the days we used Instagram a lot as a portfolio, but so you were only allowed to upload your photo once to that to Instagram. Whereas I kind of fast broke that and started just to re-upload my best performing photos, maybe once every second month, because apparently that's what the algorithm liked back then. and that helped me grow also. So something like that in that regard. You basically, I would say I'm more independent, and also I've always had like this anti-authority thing. So as soon as someone says something, I'm always like doing the opposite.
No, I love that. And we need so much more of that kind of thinking in this space, especially as it relates to technique, but also kind of these rules that people create around creativity, like the rule of thirds. Like, okay, yeah, it's like a useful tool, but it's certainly not a rule. Like, you can completely not use that and still make amazing photographs, have center weighted compositions or whatever. So, and then when it comes to and when it comes to educating, especially on YouTube, there's so many people who come across as if they're like the authority on something when it's just an opinion. It's like, let's take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, it's so hard on YouTube. We can probably dive into that later. But finding the balance between saying what you want to say in an authoritative way so people actually listen and take it in, but not saying it in a way that it is like the objective truth, but making all the disclaimers that you can. It's so hard finding that balancing act.
It is. It's something I've struggled with on the podcast too, because there's things that in my photography journey that I've developed that are like preferences, right? Mm-hmm. That, you know, for example, I have preferences around using a telephoto lens to photograph places that maybe other people haven't visited a lot, maybe I have preferences for not photographing very iconic scenes.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I'm telling people hear that and they say, well, he said you should never photograph iconic scenes. I'm like, that's not what I said. So you have to, like you said, you have to be really careful.
Yeah. And it's always like, just like half a year ago or so, I made a video about why you should photograph iconic scenes. But obviously with all the disclaimers that comes with that, that does not mean you should not go and be original.
Right, exactly. No, it's so funny. And then I'm guessing that the training you have in education helps you tremendously in the way that you approach creating content for your YouTube channel.
Yes, I can definitely use some of those techniques. I try to have a relatively, at least in the Danish terms, we call it a progressive way of educating. So that to begin with, it's quite simple, and then you advance through it. It's like the most basic thing of doing things. Another thing I also enjoy and like and think that is a good way to break things down is like 5 tips videos. I don't do them a whole lot because they seem to not work that well. I think a lot of photographers on YouTube have beaten that to the death. And we have seen like a lot of people who are also like, oh no, just another 5 tips video. But it's good to break it down because then it makes much more sense. It's good with structure, so it's not all over the place. Like, I've always felt that it's a little bit like cringe when people complain about something like that because there's a reason why it works. Like it's just look at it, it works. So figure out how you can do that. So in that way, I definitely use my educational, not just philosophy, but I've also been a gymnastic coach in many years, and you can probably see from just us sitting and talking here, I'm not the most introvert person. I don't consider myself super extrovert either, but probably there in the middle that I do not mind standing in front of masses. I do not mind talking with people. And throughout that training, I've of course like picked up just different personality traits.
Sure. Totally makes sense. Yeah. No, we could talk about YouTube for like 3 hours because I find that I'm that guy that's always like, oh, I don't like the 5 tips because it's so it's clickbait. But I have to constantly remind myself that probably 95% of the content that's uploaded to YouTube in the photography space I'm not the target audience. Like, it's the target audience are people who are just getting into photography, and you know, it's not. So I have to constantly remind myself of that. It's
definitely, of course, clickbait has become such a word that has been, it's used quite broadly. As soon as something is attention craving, people are like, oh, clickbait! Like, and I'm like, no, It's just an attention-craving title, like newspapers and magazines have used for centuries. Clickbait is when you make a title that is specifically designed to hack your brain into clicking. You almost cannot not click it, and then you don't get what is in the title. That is how I define clickbait. We saw it a lot on Facebook just when it appeared like 5 or 6 years ago, and luckily Facebook did something about like removing it. We have seen it on YouTube too, but YouTube has done so much to also combat that. Anybody who has a YouTube algorithm, a YouTube channel, knows that the algorithm takes care of that. If it is clickbait and people don't get what they think they will get when they click onto the video, then they click off, and you can see that in the retention rate of the videos. So you can see within the first 30 seconds of your video how much of the audience is still watching. And if that drops to like 40, 30, 20%, then YouTube will see that, oh, that's a clickbait video, so we stop promoting it. So it doesn't make sense to make clickbait on YouTube, but it does make sense to make attention-craving titles, because most people click onto YouTube and watch the first, just the homepage, where they get suggested a lot of different videos. That is how most people use YouTube. So I am in competition with all the other videos that YouTube user is getting presented.
Right.
And that is maybe like 12, 16 other videos, including shorts. So I have to stand out in some way. But if everybody is standing out at the same time, then you have to figure out another way to stand out.
I know.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, at the very least, I find it interesting. It can be frustrating sometimes, but at the very least, I find it interesting. And because of my training as a teacher and all that stuff, I do find mass psychology interesting.
No, I do too, for sure. I mean, that's my background. I've got my master's degree in clinical psychology. So So let's talk a little bit more about photography. So what drives you as a landscape photographer? What is keeping you going?
So to begin with, as I mentioned, it was definitely this world-building landscape photography art. Also just the fact that I was making stuff that I've never seen before, or even though other photographers had taken the same photo of Mesa Arch, I was like, whoa, can I do that? So to begin with, it was a lot of like the learning part of actually the photography. But I can definitely say that over the past years, by traveling out and exploring the world and seeing all these phenomenal, beautiful places we have around the world, I have found out what I can get in my home country, in Denmark. And even though Denmark does not have epic mountains or waterfalls or massive glaciers and all that stuff.
Right, it's not Lord of the Rings.
It's definitely not Lord of the Rings. Although I have found some pearls where you can argue that, okay, there's some fantasy stuff there. But I've definitely found what is special about Denmark. Not necessarily unique, but special about Denmark. And of course the forests, foggy forests, that is very fairy tale-ish. But it's definitely my drive for photographing in Denmark and exploring. It's basically the entire landscape photographer process where you explore, you research, you go out, you find the compositions, you wait around until the conditions are more optimal. You go out, you take the photo, you enjoy being in nature, then you go home, sit with your coffee, edit the photos and all that stuff, right? So that is my biggest drive, is definitely photographing in Denmark, because here I feel I can, more so than, let's say, in Iceland, make original photos.
Yeah, no, I mean, I found the closer you can be to home and then find a way to capture it in a way that only you can, like, because you have such an intimate relationship with that place. Yeah. And then when you're able to pull that off, it's a very rewarding experience as a landscape photographer.
Yeah, it's quite funny because, as I mentioned, I'm from Jutland, and Jutland is like the big part of Denmark. If I live in the middle, it only takes 2 hours to drive to like the furthest north or the furthest south, or a little bit more than an hour to drive to the sea in east or west direction. So I can get to a lot of places within a relatively short amount of time. However, when I moved to Copenhagen, which is on Sealand, which is a smaller island, I haven't seen a whole lot of landscape photography from this island, and I wrote a bit with some of the photographers who lived in Copenhagen. They're like, "Oh, it's a bit boring. There's not a whole lot to do. It's like, yada 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 yada." And I'm like, "Okay, I guess I have to go and do this myself." And by now, even though it only takes about an hour to drive from one side of the island to the other, whether it's north, south, east, west, I have found so many good locations just by spending the time of researching and going out and checking it out. And wow, is there a lot of potential here. It's simply just a question about finding the locations and waiting for optimal conditions.
Yeah, and even if you're not the kind of photographer that wants to wait for optimal conditions, there's still ways to leverage your knowledge about place, leverage your knowledge about composition, and then create a compelling image using mundane subjects and things like that. I think when that can be executed, it's very satisfying, but then it also says a lot about the talent and skills of the photographer.
Absolutely. Especially when I go on trips now. I just came home from Greenland. We got a lot of sunsets on this one here, so it was really good. We were quite lucky. But on the one hand, sunsets are great, but that also means that generally throughout the day you have the harsh daylight. And I like when I come home from a trip, especially in a new location, to have a good and varied collection of photos. So it's not just like golden hour orange photos all the way through. So I like it when it's also moody. I like it when you can definitely utilize daytime light, maybe not like straight overhead, direct sun down, but even then you can maybe find some shadow, do some abstract photography. I'm not a big fan of abstract photography. I'm not a big fan of black and white photography. It just doesn't have longevity for me, but that does not mean that other photographers cannot benefit from doing that. So yeah, absolutely. I have a tendency, especially in Denmark, just to go out for the most part in the morning or in the evening or night or on moody days with really bad weather.
Yeah, and I think it's really important for photographers to develop their preferences, right? And I think that just takes time in the field and understanding what you like, what you don't like, what you're drawn to, what you're not drawn to. And it sounds like over the last decade, you've honed in on the things that you have preferences for, and I think leaned into that. And I think that's an incredible thing that people should definitely think a lot more about trying to do themselves.
In the end, it's obviously just about making sure you have fun with what you do, especially with landscape photography, because there's so many other ways to earn money from that is easier to earn money from. So yeah, I think it's important that you have a passion about it and you enjoy doing it. It shouldn't be a chore.
I can't tell you how many times earlier in my career where I was on trips and it felt like a chore. And I realized it's because of the approach that I was taking. It just isn't the way my brain works. I needed to give myself a lot more freedom to release a lot of the expectations that I had and just slow down in my approach and, you know, remove all of the expectation around capturing some kind of epic scene that probably doesn't exist. Once I did that, I was much, much happier.
Yeah. It's I've definitely found over the years that it's good to know or be aware of what weather and weather patterns can do. So you can capture whatever you have in mind, but even then make sure that you don't bog yourself down with just like one single idea, but being open to whatever nature presents to you, because there's no way we can control the weather anyway. But that said, like, it was funny this winter, I was out photographing a lone tree on a field close to my parents' home, and my mom for once actually joined me, and throughout that hour before sunrise, she got the entire spectrum of a landscape photographer's mind, where you're like, oh, this looks good. Ah, no, now it's shit. Oh, maybe something is happening now. I don't think it's going to happen. Let's wait and see. Oh, maybe no. And oh, it's happening. And you're just out. So yeah.
I've had so many moments like that.
Yeah. I think it's very, very normal that everybody thinks like that, because on the one hand, it's easy for us to sit and preach that you should be a little bit more stoic about how you approach landscape photography. The fact of the matter is, if you are passionate about it, you have those thoughts, and it's just all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. My go-to these days is like, that looks like it has some potential, but we'll see. you know?
Yeah.
Otherwise, if I get too excited, then and it doesn't happen, which, is like 80% of the time.
How is it with you? Do you like go? You said you photograph locally also, but do you go out like on longer trips and like dedicate yourself to a specific location or area over like a week's time or something like that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're recording on September 18th, and on September 25th, I'll be leaving, and I'll be gone until October 15th, and all I'm photographing is Colorado fall color, which is pretty normal for me every year. But in that process, I'm very, very, very familiar with the locations that I have preferences for. I have probably 15 grand scenic ideas in mind that are new or older scenes that I want to revisit. And then I'm always just open to taking a hike into the woods and seeing what speaks to me. So my approach is pretty varied. And the way I like to distill it is put myself in interesting places at interesting times and then let nature speak to me and have a conversation and see what happens.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
All right.
Anything more than that, I feel like you're just setting yourself up for a lot of frustration.
Oh yeah, you can definitely do that. It's
it's pretty uncommon for me to like look at the weather and say, oh, tomorrow it looks like it's going to be this, so I'm going to go. Like I got way too much stuff going on for that to like rule my life. I used to be that way a little bit, but now I'm just like, I'm going to carve out a week and a half, go, see what happens, and have fun. And I think that approach is more rewarding for me.
Yeah, and that's fantastic to hear that you found out what works for you, because I think I'm definitely the one where, oh, it's foggy tomorrow, you gotta go. It's that said, like I would say that especially for Denmark, which I find to be very conditions dependent, because the landscapes doesn't do the job for you. You have to combine it with interesting conditions, whether that's fog or Milky Way or Northern Lights or whatever. I definitely find that when I travel, obviously I just get the conditions that I get. That I get a lot of unforeseen photos, stuff I hadn't pre-visualized, and I'm like, whoa, okay, that happened. I have, of course, over the years learned to recognize the possibilities of certain weather patterns and light and all that, and can use it more optimally than I could like just 5 or 10 years ago. But I definitely find that specifically for Denmark, I have so many photos in mind because I've come to a location, I'm like, oh, this could look so good with the Milky Way above, or this could look so good with the reflection of the Northern Lights and stuff. Like, I have so many ideas. So I have so many ideas that I have plenty for the next many, many, many years. So in that way, I'm also not driving myself crazy in the sense that I'm sitting and waiting for stuff to happen. Like, when it happens, and until then, I can fill out time with something else.
Yeah, when I lived in Oregon, I was probably an hour's drive from this trailhead that takes you up to a pretty well-known location that overlooks Mount Hood. And I had always wanted this photograph from up there. Like I had seen this photograph that Alex Noriega and Ryan Dyer had photographed together actually the same day. And I always wanted that similar scene. This was like 2014 when I lived there. And I think I went back up there maybe 6 times to try to get that scene, and it never really happened the way that I envisioned. And I ended up getting other images that I liked, but I heard about this other photographer who had literally slept in the parking lot for a month straight and hiked up there every single day to get that shot and never got it. And to me, that's just like OCD, right? I can't
dedication.
do that.
That's dedication. I personally wouldn't do that, but if anybody else is up for that, like, be my guest.
Yeah, no. So like, that's definitely not my approach. I mean, there's like 4 photographs that I know I really want to get for my website that I know, and the only reason I want to get them is because I know I can sell them.
Yeah,
and
okay.
they're beautiful. They're beautiful photographs. They're just they're very. I mean, some of my listeners are gonna be surprised to hear this because we talk about icons a lot, but they're very iconic scenes. I've never been able to execute them in good conditions, and so like once every other year, I might revisit one of them to just see if it happens.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that approach to photography is mind-numbing and frustrating for me.
Yeah. Yeah, you asked earlier, like, what drives me as a photographer. Another thing is, besides being original, is also to challenge myself. Like, it's, for me, I only just realized last year how my possibilities are for capturing, like, the auroras in Denmark. Like, yeah, you can go to Iceland and Lofoten in Norway easily and get the auroras. But I wasn't aware that once we actually got like really strong auroras, that you could get them in Denmark in the displays that we have managed to get over the past couple of years. Obviously, it's solar maximum, and we have a chance now to get it even more so than before. But okay, so now I have photographed the auroras a couple of times. I've had some trees in the foreground. I have had a hut in the foreground. Okay, what's the next thing I can do? Okay, let's see if I can capture them with a reflection. And let's see if I can capture them with a boat in that reflection. And just like, upping myself. For me, that's definitely... I like to challenge myself and just having those stepping stones where I feel like these are harder and harder conditions. No. Regular human beings can probably not see that this is a hard photo to get, but at the very least I know that it was, and I can advance. I feel personally I can advance in that way, and again, just as you say, like the icons sells. It's not necessarily the photos that put the most work into, or the photos that are the hardest to get that sells the best. I think most people over the years have realized that it's all about what the person who wants to buy it can relate to.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that, but
yeah.
It's interesting. I like what you said there about kind of like building in terms of complexity of difficulty, because that actually resonates a lot with me as well. I mean, you think about night photography here in the desert Southwest, close to where I live. You can get the Milky Way over some really cool desert features. Awesome. That was fun. Okay, now what if I also include indigenous ruin in that particular image? Okay, cool. Now, what if I somehow find a way to put a light inside the ruin so that, and then so like you just start building the idea.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's a really great way to approach photography. Is just escalating it a little bit by a little bit.
It definitely gives like another level to it, and I find the challenge fun, and if I can overcome it, I'm like, cool, now what? It's not always that. I remember the first time I photographed the Northern Lights at Stocksnes in Iceland, those famous double mountains where you can get the reflection in the sea. And I've seen a decent amount of photos with no auroras around there, and I chased that shot for years, and I was like, finally, there's a chance here. And I went and I got it, and afterwards I was like, okay, that was it. What then? It's like, so on the one hand, it's great to challenge yourself, but on the other hand, once you have conquered that challenge, then what's next?
That's funny you mentioned that scene, because that was the first place I photographed the aurora as well. Mm-hmm. And I had the exact same experience. Went there, got the aurora, was awesome. And then I was like, how can we make this better? And I looked at the tide chart and I was like, oh, tomorrow night, it's supposed to be like high tide is receding, and so that whole area was going to be full of water. And I was like, what if we could get the reflection of the aurora with that? And I got it, and I was like, yes, that was awesome, right? And of course it ended up being a better photograph too. So I think that's an awesome way to approach it.
Exactly.
I think in the education world they call that scaffolding, right? Like
yeah, could definitely be. I'm not sure I've heard it in Danish with that, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. I know this is something that you're interested in. I've I'm interested in it. I'm constantly posting about it on social media, not necessarily in a positive way, by the way, but
Me neither.
I think it'll be an interesting conversation because I know that you're very open about kind of the way that you edit your photographs. I mean, you talked earlier about kind of building these fantasy worlds, and I think that's a really cool concept. And then now we have AI that's come onto the scene, and people can do the same thing with a couple of keystrokes. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on AI and how they're impacting our industry and photography?
Yeah, where to even begin? So yes, exactly. I'm very liberal when it comes to how people can and edit their photos. It's completely up to themselves. I have no say in what people do with their photos. And I personally do not mind making composites. I don't do it a whole lot anymore because for me there's no challenge in it, so it's just a little bit meh. But back in the days, it was way harder to make a composite and make a good composite. And I'm sure a lot of not to be demeaning, the purist photographers out there may wish themselves back to the days where compositing and Photoshop photography was something that we complained about. Now we have AI images. I don't mind AI in the sense that it can help us in the industry finding solutions to medical problems that they have in that sector. I find it very problematic in the arts field, because art is something that we humans do. It's an expression of ourselves. The point is that it's made by humans for humans. Now, AI can be used as a tool. Fine. I find that Enrico Fossati, the Italian photographer, he has a very distinct style and he uses it quite a lot. And the way he uses it, I think he makes it as like a base background image and makes some composite stuff where he really dives into how to use it as an art and he can express it himself, which I find, well, that's one way to do it. It's great. And he's not passing it off as photography.
Right. Look at this amazing scene that I photographed yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Come on,
I think
man.
it's very important that there is a distinction between AI imaging and photography. Now, there's a whole debate about how we define photography and what a photo is, whatever we do call it. But AI imaging is not photography. It is breaking down photos, photorealism, whatever we call it. It don't have to be photos. It can also be paintings and cartoons and whatever, and makes a new image. So from its originality, it's not a photo. It's image generation. And the problem for many of us photographers is that it will now compete on a commercial level with the results we get as photographers. But it is a completely new tool to create images. And obviously we can throw all that into like the free open marketplace out there in the world, and whoever needs a certain image can either choose the AI version or the photography version. The thing I'm having a really, really hard time with, and I think for me that is where it's such a big no-go, is that when it comes to especially the commercial aspect of it, is that the programmers who have made the AI softwares, algorithms, whatever we call them, have managed to create a program that is using their skills, that they can copy our skills, our training, our form, whether it's formal training or not formal training, but what we do as photographers, as artists, they can basically just copy it.
And our intellectual property.
And our intellectual property. That's the next part. It's kind of already illegal, I think, but some say it's a gray zone, others say it's straight up illegal. I personally would say it's completely illegal, and it is. So they should not steal it. But it's a bit like I have a certain skill set. I create a machine that can rob a bank, and then they say it's not illegal. It specifically doesn't say that robbing a bank with this machine is illegal. And that is like, what? It should be straight up illegal. Like, nobody in their right mind who has training in the arts or in the skills or whatever would give an AI algorithm permission to train the photos on this, because we are basically giving our skill set to programmers, and then they can utilize it. If people are still in doubt about it, I've seen a decent amount of YouTube videos where musicians have the same issue. I think it's broadly in the arts field that AI is a problem. Yes, you can probably in some aspects utilize it as a tool, but I found that there's this big program that basically just makes songs from the bottom up. No, you cannot specifically make me a Taylor Swift song, but you can definitely make a song that to the untrained ear sounds like an original piece of work from the 1950s or 1960s. And those who made this program for music specifically says that this is a tool for the democratization of music, so that everybody can listen to exactly what they want to listen to. The problem is that comes with such a, sorry to swear, shit ton of problems both on an ethical level, but also on a cultural level, because it's music and it's arts that makes us humans and gets us together. It's a social aspect of being human. And if we are all just sitting with our own specific music in the ears all the time, then there's nothing that binds us together. We can't sit down and get together and say like, oh, Beatles is the best thing in the world, or Taylor Swift is the best thing in the world. Like, and that is where this, you can almost call it like ultra democratization or ultra liberalization of the arts. I find that problematic. Will it go that far? I don't know, but I can definitely identify the problems.
Yeah, I think with any technology, the issue at hand is the idea that if you remove ethics from the equation, then it becomes very problematic. And when you think about artificial intelligence, it's an amazing tool. It's an amazing thing that has been created. It's how it's being used is then becomes within question, and how people are talking about it and using it, and the ethics that are involved and how they talk about what they've created. It's funny that you mentioned painting, and it's funny that you mentioned compositing and label what is a photograph. AI creations is not a photograph. Completely agree, by the way. I mean, it's funny, right? Because we've had this problem in the arts since the beginning of time. I mean, when photography was invented, painters were worried that painting was going to be eliminated because photography can basically create an exact replica of what these people are painting and do it in a much faster and better way. So painters were worried. But then photographers realized that they wanted photography to stand on its own as an art form. And interestingly is like, photographers never call themselves painters, right? Like,
yeah.
Right? Like, we respect painters. We're like, hey, what I do is photography. You're a painter. I respect that. I'm not calling what I create a painting. I'm calling it a photograph. Along those same lines, then you advance along the technology a little bit further. People are using Photoshop to create photographs that don't exist, right? Like, you have skies that are different, and you composite in birds or whatever. You've created a scene that looks exactly like a photograph, but uses photographic elements to create an end result that isn't necessarily a pure photograph, right? And so then the purist photographers complain that that's not a photograph either, right?
Yeah.
And along those same tokens, like, it seems logical to me that those people maybe wouldn't call that a photograph. They'd maybe call it a digital art creation, be happy with it, like, look at this amazing artwork I created. And then you get to artificial intelligence, same exact problems happening, right? People are using AI prompts to create images. They're calling them photos. And then the people who before them, like digital artists, photographers, they're mad because, hey, that's not a photograph. That's a digital art. That's a AI creation. So I think a lot of it's in how we talk about what we're creating and being honest with our audience about the process. You mentioned Enrico Fossati. I think he's an awesome example of someone who's leveraging artificial intelligence to create really cool stuff. Yep. He's weaving in photographic elements that he's captured. He's compositing and stuff. And he's just calling it, artistic digital art. And I think it's really beautiful and it's awesome. But he doesn't call it a photograph, right?
No.
And I think those distinctions are important. And I think it dates back to the inception of photography. Just like I was saying, photographers don't call their work paintings. They call them photographs. And I think people who appreciate photographs for what they are, they have this expectation that it was captured using a camera and it's capturing a moment in time. And when people label something a photograph, they're kind of leveraging that historical, like everything that's wrapped up in that definition.
Yeah, it's something I've, of course, also thought a lot about with my philosophy background and all the stuff that, because I've been doing composite, I always provokingly say, well, my photographs are twice the photographs that yours are because it's composed of two. So, but no, it's interesting because there's this ongoing debate about what is a photograph to begin with. And when we look back through history, like the first photographs weren't even captured on film. So is film suddenly not the original way of doing photography? Many of the old, like really historical, famous photos. There's this one famous one from the US of black and white, a woman sitting with her family. I simply don't remember the specific context, but it's a super famous photo. And that one was, well, it was not digitally made back then, but in the darkroom, they changed quite a lot about that photo. Mm-hmm. Likewise, a good example I find from the First World War, there were some photographers there. They made composite photos because obviously they could not capture everything that encapsulated the moment when they were on the battlefield. So they needed to composite in maybe soldiers running or maybe some planes or some explosions and all that stuff, so they could give a more precise idea about what it is to be on the front during the First World War. So here the composite is, you could argue, closer to reality,
right?
Than,
sure, totally.
than what the non-composite would be. So it always comes down to perception and definitions, how we talk about it, and all that stuff, and
intent.
Yeah, and intent. Exactly.
I think intent
is a big
is,
deal of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you think about someone who's using an AI prompt to generate an AI image, and then they post it in a Facebook group that's for black and white photography, and they say, look at this photo that I captured.
Yeah,
I think their intent is pretty clear there, that they're trying to deceive people and thinking that it's a photograph. And I think that intent piece is really important. And that's the stuff that I constantly am grinding my axle on in terms of how people talk about their photography. Is if your intent is to deceive your audience, you're doing a really good job, versus where if your intent is to create a relationship with your audience that's built around trust and talking more about why you did whatever you did, whether it's using AI or compositing or whatever technique you're using to create the work. I think that's where you can have more meaningful conversations about the work itself. And what I find in AI and in a lot of composite work is that artistic intent is usually just, it's not there. The intent is really to deceive. And, so I think that intent piece is really critical.
It's interesting because one of the things that probably surprised me the most over the past year or so is how many of these completely and obviously fake images or AI images are getting shared in photography groups. And
I know.
Just generally being shared on Facebook where people think that it's real. Like, I'm all for people doing the artistic stuff with whatever photos that they do. But the problem is that there's some kind of stuff going on with Facebook where you just get like 4 images that are posted like, this is the Faroe Islands, and it is obviously not the Faroe Islands because nothing like that looks like that in the Faroe Islands, and it's just AI images, and they look so obviously fake that has never been a photograph, and it just gets shared like thousands upon thousands of times, and you're like, what is going on here? And there seems to be some bots leveraging people's attention there, but the thing that has surprised me the most is that even photographers who have either been on my workshops or I know who are doing photography share these images, and I'm like,
they're duped.
Can't you see the difference? It's so obvious.
I actually, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I made a post about this on Facebook.
I think I saw it.
Yeah, I picked out maybe 5 or 6 images that were obviously AI. I was actually wrong about a couple of them, which unfortunately a couple of people went out of their way to tell me that. But that was the whole point. The whole point of my post was trying to like show people how to spot the fake images. And obviously it's not always easy because it's getting better and better. Because I'm so obsessed with this thing, is like I've kind of unraveled what's happening here. Is that it all started when Facebook bonuses kicked into place, and a lot of people don't know about Facebook bonuses, but basically it's like a trial program where Facebook reaches out to creators and they will pay you based on how much engagement your photos get or your posts get, whatever. And you know, it's not a lot of money. You're looking at like $20 to $100 a month or something like that, but
that's a big difference for some.
If you live in Vietnam, which I'm pretty sure a lot of these creators are just Vietnamese, it's like crime syndicates. I mean, honestly, they've created these pages. They're using AI to generate these images. They're actually stealing our photographs and putting them through AI and then spitting something out that looks sort of like what we've created. And then the real tell is the captions are always the same. It's like Monument Valley, Arizona, USA, and then there's a USA flag. It's always that formula of like place, state, country, flag, like every single time. And a lot of times it's funny because it's wrong. It's like obviously a photograph from the Faroe Islands, but they're labeled it as like England or something stupid.
Yeah. I've definitely seen that too, and recognized that pattern.
And then I'm also guessing that it's because it's a network of people.
Yeah.
I think that, have you seen those pictures of like people in Vietnam where they have like a wall of cell phones that they just where they like it's like 50 iPhones, or they're probably like cheap Androids or whatever, but they're all logged into Facebook or something, and they're paying people like probably 10 cents a day, and they just go in and they like and share something on these fake accounts. And I think that's how they're able to leverage the engagement algorithm, is that they have hundreds of fake accounts that are propagating these things, and then they're leveraging the Facebook bonuses, and it's crazy.
If there's money involved, you can bet your ass there's someone who will try to use that system. That is 100% sure as the amen in the church. That's 100% sure.
But to your point, the frustrating thing is seeing like photographers fall for it, you know, and resharing it and actually like fighting about it. They're like, no, this is real. I swear it's real. It's like, dude, have you ever been there? Like, it doesn't look like that.
It's frustrating because on the one hand you think like, it's just dumb that you can't see the difference, but obviously for us, I guess, as a commercial point, it takes the attention away from our stuff.
Thank you.
And again, that's like, you can always drive that back to, okay, like, but my epic photos are probably taking attention away from the people who have a little bit more natural editing, right? So then we can battle about that too. But at the very least, it is the AI stuff does not come from genuine artists. Like, if it was like, as we have talked about an example, Enrico Fasati, I'm all for it. Good, go for it. But when it's this, just like, money hoarding AI bot farm thing, that's just like, I think every human being on planet Earth can agree that that's just bullshit.
Totally. It is funny though, because I have seen a lot of well-known photographers who are open about being composite artists complain about AI. In the way that you've just described it, like you're taking attention away from me.
Yeah.
And there is part of me that's been like, so now you know how it feels.
Yeah, I know. I know your stance on that over the years, but it's all good. It's fine. It's fine. But it's exactly it is what it is. It's a game of attention when it comes to social media, and there's of course ways you can leverage that on a psychological level. But obviously, when it's not genuine artists who are behind it, I'm a little bit more worried about the platforms that we use.
Yeah, it's funny. There's been a few memes about AI over the last 6 months that have caught my attention in terms of like, I thought AI was supposed to make our lives easier, like do my laundry, do the dishes, make it so that I can have more free time. But really what you've done is you just made it harder for me to be creative. It is funny that way.
Yeah,
no, go ahead.
But I've also obviously seen over the past years that, and I feel it myself, obviously, as I just mentioned, like I don't do a whole lot of composites anymore because it's just become so easy that there's no technical stuff about it, and I've taken so many photos by now that there's no reason really to do it and create these fantasy escapes. But I definitely also see that as the pendulum swings, as it does with trends, that obviously film photography is coming back way more, and even though film photographers are also taking it into Photoshop and changing stuff from what I've seen at the very least. But at the very least, the more, I always hate using the words like less or more edited photos, but I think we can all collectively agree what I mean when I use those words. But it's definitely there's, again, I also hate because it's so loaded, but a more pure way of doing photography.
I hate that word
come back
too,
over the years, because it's so subjective and loaded.
Yeah, and to your point, I think there is a silver lining in all of this, because I think what I'm starting to see in the photography community is that there is a stronger preference now for natural scenes, like, oh yeah, that's a real place that you can actually visit. And I think AI is actually helping people kind of remember the connection that you can make with a place through photography. And so I think there are silver linings that AI is kind of forcing us to realize.
It's also just like a massive, even though I personally am very goal oriented with my photography, a massive process of being a landscape photographer is being out in the landscapes. And you don't get that with AI imaging.
Yeah, and it's funny because another silver lining to that is if there's a lot of people out there that are very results oriented, that never really liked being outside to begin with, they just wanted to create these scenes. Hey, maybe there's going to be fewer people going to the places we love, and that's not a bad thing.
True that.
Yeah. So there's silver linings, right?
Yeah, that was always ups and downs.
Well, you had just kind of started on a nice segue there about Instagram and YouTube and the attention economy, and I couldn't help but notice, but like you have 1 million followers on Instagram, which is crazy. So like, as a full-time photographer, how do you incorporate YouTube and Instagram given the state of the attention economy, and how do you balance that in terms of your mental health and your like time allocation and things like that?
I gave up on Instagram years ago, let me put it like that, so that's not a problem with the mental health there. I think it was probably in the pandemic times where Instagram really changed to being more about reels, so it's not really a photography app anymore. It's still very much an attention app. Like what people respond to is what's getting promoted by the algorithm. It's kind of the same with YouTube, but especially Instagram. And I had my glory days there in like 18, 19, 20, where I really exploded and figured out how to gain this attention and being able to promote my photography through that. Since then, Instagram is just like it's a complete shit app for photographers by now. Hopefully, over the years, it will bounce back. There have been a few adjustments that may change it back. but we don't know. Like, they do whatever they do. For Instagram, it's all about making sure that people stay on the platform. They don't give a rat's ass about the users whatsoever, or at least the content creators whatsoever. They care about the users, that they stay. So yeah, I just upload to Instagram like maybe once a day, and put it into a carousel and like remind people, hey, I still exist if you even see me in your feed. And then I use it actually quite a lot for stories when I'm especially out traveling. I don't make a whole lot of stories when I'm just sitting here back home. I tend to keep my private life relatively private. But YouTube is like, that's my baby, my YouTube channel. There's no doubt that for how I set up my business, that the YouTube channel is the key to most of it. It's where people can see who I am, what I do, my approach to photography. It's where I can validate that I can actually take photographs, so that hopefully people will go on and want to learn more. So I have my own products with my ebooks and my Photoshop course, editing course, and obviously also like I remind people from time to time that I do workshops too. So in that way, YouTube is like the key. And once YouTube dies, then we have a problem. But let's wait until that happens.
It's interesting with Instagram because I know there's a lot of people that are frustrated with it. I mean, obviously you're like, it's garbage now. And I have to say it's still one of my favorite places to go for photography, but it's a lot of it's...
Oh, don't get me wrong. It is for me too. I use it a lot like that.
like I think if you view it not as a growth tool or like an attention tool, I think if you view it as a tool to cultivate and maintain relationships and community, and then you follow people that, you know, either your friends or people that you admire and people you want to stay in touch with or see their photography, and, you know, you're very selective about that curation process. I think it's a wonderful platform for that if you use it that way. But if you're trying to use it to, I don't know, I think the days of gaining followers on Instagram organically are pretty much gone. I could be wrong, but
yeah, like the guy I do my Iceland workshops with, Jeroen, he has really exploded over the years. But there is a trend for volcanic stuff, and he's a complete volcano nerd. So he does a lot of that photography, and he has really exploded. So obviously he can benefit from that. But I completely agree. If I want to see other photographers' work, I definitely go to Instagram first. Back in the days, I used a lot of like 500 pixels, but once they sold that to Getty and changed the algorithm, it's like, well, who cares? So Instagram is definitely the place where I write with people. It's where I engage with other people's work and see other people's work way more than on any other platform.
Yeah, totally. Well, man, we have hundreds of other topics I'd love to talk to you about.
Let's keep going.
So you've got a lot going on in your photography business. You're a busy dude. How do you keep up your passion and enthusiasm for photography?
A really good question. Like, it's a very, very deep question. I don't know. It's just there. Like, I cannot help myself thinking about life and stuff and photography. And obviously sometimes I also feel like, like when a video isn't performing as I wanted it to perform, or I've spent a lot of time of like taking a specific photo that I'm super proud about, but nobody acknowledges
no one likes
that.
Yeah,
Nobody likes it or something like that. It can, of course, get to you, but in the end, I do recognize that when I'm out on location that I'm the most happy. It is out on the location when I'm actually creating. I'm in the creative process. Well, I go into the flow zone, as we talked about, we want to talk about, but that is where, like, I just keep going. I get ideas. I want to do that. It's just this, I don't know, creative mindset that just drives me. And because if I didn't have success with it, I would either try something else or maybe not do this. Obviously, I think success is a big part of what drives us as human beings, no matter what we do. So in that regard, that is definitely a big part of it. And that's also why I have, over the years, designed my business model to such an extent that I can actually spend my time on being creative and doing something that I personally find interesting. And then there's all the other stuff that comes with running a business. That's just work. Like, it's a dream job, but there's part of the job that is annoying, obviously. Like sitting and answering emails, doing your taxes, all that stuff. But since I've designed my business so that I can go out and actually be creative, that holds me to it. Like, I have so many ideas I want to do.
Yeah, and I think there's this misconception that exists out there that full-time landscape photography is like this dream where you get to go frolic in the woods with your camera 24/7, 365. And I think unless you're like a trust fund kid or something like that, that's a pretty unrealistic way to think about it. But the way, because I have a lot of things going on and I'm constantly answering emails, working on projects, creating a web page, or, like distributing books, or like things that it's not outside taking a picture.
No.
But I see all of those things as the things that I need to do in order to enable that lifestyle of being able to go out for 20 days in fall color and photograph the places that I love. So, I think you have to take it all as kind of just part of the package. And when I think about it that way, when I reframe it that way, it makes me excited about those tasks too. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go take 40 books to the post office today, even though that's not very fun, but that's also part of what makes this journey really cool. So I think it's all in mindset.
It really is just like one big cost benefit list you need to make and figure out what you want to do with your life. If you have that luxury that you can actually design that yourself. I have specifically chosen, at least so far, not to make physical products because it comes with a lot of like logistical hassle. It binds me to one place. I can't do as much travel as I want to do. I live in a small apartment. It's only 66 square meters. Having a big printer, putting it in the living room or in it just like it creates more problems than it solves. Yes, I can earn money that way, but I can also earn money in another way. And I would rather make an extra video on YouTube where I can promote my ebooks than I want to go through that ginormous hassle it is of the repetitive work of dealing with books and so forth. And I live on 4th floor. Like, I'm not carrying 2,000 books up on 4th floor and putting them in my corridor. So there's a lot of like, yes, I can do it, but I need to weigh in what is the cost of doing it. Maybe once I have a house and I have a room where I can actually have a proper office, then yes, I can probably do it.
Yeah, that reminded me of something. Are you familiar with the impact effort matrix, where you basically take a square and you put a line in the middle horizontally and vertically, and you say, like, when you're thinking about things that you're going to spend time on, like, does it take a lot of time or a little bit of time, a lot of time, and is it low impact or high impact? Yeah. And if it's like a lot of time, low impact, it's like, don't do that stuff, right?
Yes, exactly.
And if it's low time, high impact, like, yeah, you should do that stuff all day long. And if it's high impact, high time, then it's like you need to think more carefully about it. So I use that all the time in order to make decisions about what I will actually put my effort into. And it's actually helped me a lot to stay focused on different tasks throughout the day.
Yeah, and exactly. Like right now I'm debating with myself whether I should change my homepage, because I'm using SmugMug as a base plate for my homepage, but I don't really feel that it's like updated. It's fine enough. We go into it, you can find all the stuff you need to find. But if I should change to something, maybe WordPress, and start learning that. But then again, like, what's actually the benefit from doing that? Like, how much will I benefit from it? Will it help people getting to my products faster? Will I be able to earn more money from it? Yes, no, maybe, I don't know. Like, let's say that I went on to being sponsored by, let's say, Squarespace. If I actually used Squarespace as a homepage, it would be easier for me to actually convince people to do it. Like, it's all about, like, the consequences of what you think. So it's yeah, it makes complete sense. It's kind of how I think. I just wasn't aware specifically of that tool, but it's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, especially if you're like, I have 100 things I want to get done this week. How do I decide which ones to do?
Yeah.
You put them all in that list or in that matrix, and it pretty much sorts itself out pretty quickly.
That's a good tool. I should probably hand it over to my girlfriend. She's an academic, so
we have a joke in my house because my wife has a full-time job. She works from home, but she doesn't hardly do anything in the photography stuff except for like give me ideas every once in a while. But we have a joke that she's the CEO of Matt Payne Photography and I'm the intern, and so it's funny you mentioned your girlfriend because I wish I had somebody else helping me.
Yeah, so she's an academic and she studies religion, and it's on a high level. Like she is one of the leading Viking religious scholars in the world
that's
right
cool.
now. But it's what we find is that a lot of the thoughts she has, because research is also a very creative process, so we can most certainly relate to each other. She has her PhD, and the amount of time she spent on that for only having 5 to 10 people actually read it is like, for me, it's just like, what? It's just like massive effort, like, and obviously she got the PhD, so now she has the check mark to be able to continue her research and get the full-time job or the stipendiary, so the money to continue her research and what she's. So it was like it was high effort, but obviously over the time, like obviously she can benefit a lot from it, but it's still like, what? Like 2, 3, 4 years making a PhD and only having 5 to 10 viewers.
I mean, and I feel like a lot of YouTube creators feel that way too, right? Like,
yeah,
I just spent 4 hours making this video and I have 12 people watch it.
4 hours? That's luxury, I tell you.
You know what I mean, though?
Yeah, I know completely what you mean. And it frustrates me too. Like, I have, right now, I have made some of my favorite videos I've ever made over the past couple of months, and I make original stuff. I make it from new places. I present like, I think in my Svalbard video, I present like 70 new photos. That's ridiculous. Nobody else does that. And it has not even got to 20,000 views, which relative to what I get on my channel is not a lot. Mm-hmm. So it's like you put in so much effort and so much information and content into making a really, really good video. And it took me a good week making that video, including editing the photos. And then it kind of like flops, and you're like, damn it, I should have just made another video about gear.
It's that is the thing about YouTube that I think is probably the most frustrating for me is kind of what gains traction versus what doesn't. And part of my frustration is that long form content that goes into depth and is more philosophical or psychological as it relates to photography. Yeah, that's content that I would consume a lot of. But that's not what the algorithm likes.
It's funny because we keep saying what the algorithm wants.
But it's
Fact
people.
Of the matter is, it's people. It's mass psychology. It's what the masses want. Like YouTube has just updated or not updated. Yeah, they made the algorithm so that it reflects what people actually click and consume.
Right, and then the problem is the things that most people click and consume is stuff that I'm like, no, thank you.
Like my second most popular video this year is all about aperture. I made one about aperture just like 2 years ago that kind of didn't do well, but I kind of found another thumbnail and I made it into a little bit more attention-craving title. I paced it differently, and it's still going strong. And the effort to making that video was nothing compared to the videos that I make where I'm actually out in the field taking original photos. But it's so important that I need to remind myself again and again and again and again that the vast majority of landscape photographers who use YouTube are what we would define as beginners. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that when you go and you actually search for information on YouTube and what captures your attention, most of the people out there, most of my audience at the very least, are happy amateurs, and that's a good thing. I just need to remind myself that it shouldn't necessarily be too advanced what I say and do in my YouTube videos. I need to figure out another way to get that out. And yeah, obviously you make different kind of videos for different parts of your audience, and you make some videos that gives you new subscribers, because these kind of videos give me like no new subscribers, and that is also a thing that YouTube is like, oh, that video is not making any subscribers, we cannot promote it anymore. And I think, come on. Yeah, but again,
it's interesting.
If it's people who subscribe, it's not the algorithm. So
true. It's interesting because it reminds me a lot about making photographs too, right? Like,
yeah,
there's videos that like you're very proud of, probably the ones that took a long time, showcases your work in an interesting way, like you had to put a lot of sweat, blood, and tears into it, and those are the ones that probably don't perform nearly as well, but they're the ones you're the most proud about. And I think for a lot of us, we have photographs that are like that too, right? Like maybe we're really proud about it and it's like represents what we think is some of our best work, but it maybe doesn't resonate quite as much with the general public as maybe an iconic scene does. And so sometimes you have to make that cost benefit analysis. Like I'm going to put a little bit of effort into creating a photograph that I'm not that excited about, but I know that it's going to get people to engage with my photography. And then it also enables me to spend energy and time on the things that I actually want to do.
Yeah. And I'm ludicrously bad at managing that part, because I'm like, I want to do this. I really want to take this photo. So I put all my energy into that and make a video from it, and then it just tanks on YouTube. Whereas I should just have made another video on shutter speed.
Yeah, no, it's hard to think about that stuff, for sure.
When I was in Ireland last year, it's a fun story with Nigel and Michael Shane Bloom and Darren, and we talked about how, because we are all YouTubers and doing landscape photography, we always like sharpness videos always does well. Okay, so all four of us, let's make 4 videos from here where it's all about sharpness and see what happens. And it's just like, it was a dumb idea and it never manifested, but we have the same experiences with using YouTube. People are obsessed generally about sharp photos, and obviously you want to have a sharp photo and you want to have whatever you're taking a photo of in focus. But I think for us trained photographers, that is just such a basic thing that...
And it's boring.
It's all the other stuff. Yeah, it's boring because it's just a basic thing. It's just what you do. It's like breathing. Like, it's all the other stuff about photography that's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's my biggest issue with YouTube is like it perpetuates. So I say this without getting in trouble. Like it holds people back from actually getting more in depth on the things that actually matter in the pursuit of photography, right? Like understanding what drives you and motivates you as a human being and as an artist. Thinking about what you want your photography to say about you or the world, what stories you want your photography to tell, what's your relationship between your photography and the places that you photograph, or your relationship with place or emotion. I mean, what, like those more important, deeper things, like those things just don't get the attention. And so then a lot of photographers, they just don't go there. And I think a lot of people...
But that's also because we are both trained in psychology and philosophy and deep thinking and all that stuff, right? So it means something for us. But I guess over the years I found out like 90% of photographers get into photography because they're interested in gadgets and they're interested in the gear. And over the years I found that a lot of... At the very least, the people who come on my workshops, that could be down to the price, but they are like doctors, engineers, they are old lawyers or something like that. And I guess for the most part that those subjects are in many ways way more technical also. So where we probably present the more soft side of photography, the philosophical side and all that stuff, no matter if we make attention-craving photos or not, most of the people that I interact with and the people who are in my comments or watch my videos are probably more like technically oriented, which is also one of the reasons why if I want to talk about composition, I design a video where I talk about how can you get good compositions with this piece of gear. In that way, you like sell the video as if it's about the gear, but you actually teach people about composition.
Right, you have to be sneaky about it, and
I'm not sure it's I don't like to use the word sneaky because it sounds as if it's clickbait, but the point is that it's in the title. People can see what the video is about, but it's also that there's maybe more than just owning the lens. How do I use the lens? And what is important is how I compose the photo. Putting it together, right?
Well, no, I didn't mean sneaky in a bad way. Just like hijacking people so that it's like, I'm going to get your attention on this thing that you think you're really excited about, and now I'm going to show you something that's actually really cool that you didn't know. We do that a lot in my workshops because, like, to your point, we have people that come on and, they're doctors, lawyers, things like that. And they're very technical and they're obsessed with gear, and that's what they want to talk about. And we'll talk about it. That's fine. I don't mind it. It's fun. And what I find is that by the end of the workshop, they kind of open up to being able to hear different perspectives, different ideas. And you start talking about some of the photographs that they've created, and you talk about all the positive things that photograph is doing, the composition, the light, the flow, how they place this object, and that's where you start to see them like really, like a light bulb comes on and their eyes get really big and they get really excited because it's like, oh my gosh, you're right. There's more to this than gear. And that's where the exciting things start to happen, is when people can start to recognize that growth path that is now open to them. So anyway, I think
exactly.
Yeah. It's just, it is frustrating.
It's funny because obviously for the photo workshops and photo tours and so forth, like people want to see these amazing places, and you bring them to the amazing places and they take the amazing photos. But a big part of it is the conversation throughout the tours and the workshops about, like, one thing is to take the amazing photo, but why do you take the amazing photo? And I think most of the people who come on, like, they are in that initial growth period that I was in back in 2015 when I went to Iceland for the first time, and I saw the dancing northern lights for the first time, and I photographed my first sunset above a waterfall, and it's most people are there. And obviously, there's so many more steps ahead. At least I hope so, because else it's going to be the boring next decade.
Yeah, and I mean, that's been my major focus for this podcast, is like helping people realize that there's more to it than that other stuff. And it's interesting because my audience is kind of all over the place. Like, you have beginners, intermediates, people have been doing it for 30 years, and obviously different episodes do better based on kind of where they're at in their path and what they're interested in. But you can definitely see I've kind of given up on understanding which episodes people like, because the ones that I think are the best ones, half the people are like, that was okay. And then the ones where I'm like, God, that was so boring, other people are like, that was the best episode you've ever done. I'm like, I don't understand. Yeah. I feel the same about my videos. So I think it's very natural for us who makes these kind of things. Yeah. Well, wanted to get your idea on one more question. I'd like to get your take on the idea of originality in our space. Mm-hmm. I think it's no secret, especially the longer that you do this craft, the field is pretty dominated with copycat behavior. How can we find our own original images? Just keep doing it. At some point you get bored of taking the same photos that everybody else are taking, and you want to challenge yourself. At least that's how I found it. Boy, was that an easy answer? I think that's actually really true. Yeah. It's, as much as I enjoy going to Kirkjufell in Iceland, it's a magnificent mountain and it's beautiful waterfall. For sure.
And when I look at an iconic place like that, I still have not photographed a really epic sunset or sunrise there. I still haven't.
Yeah.
I've been there so many times. So, yes, from a personal perspective, that would be an original photo, actually getting that shot there. But so I would do that if the conditions were like that. But they're usually not. And then I start like exploring, because I don't want to just stand there. I've done that 1,000 times. Then, okay, how can I make a new and interesting approach to whatever subject I'm photographing? That's obviously one way to do it. As I said, I've discovered Denmark and what I can do in Denmark, and I can actually make world-class photography in Denmark. So why not do it? It's easier. I don't need to travel. I can control it way more. I'm not saying I'm a control freak, but I can sit back home and wait until awesome stuff happens. And I feel that I can push the landscape, not necessarily community, but what is being done in Denmark, I can push that forward. I can make stuff that nobody else has done in Denmark relatively easy, because Denmark is not a landscape photography country like Iceland is, or regions like Western US, or generally Britain is just super famous. So in that way, like at some point, you just start everything that you have learned from photographing the iconic locations, which I think is great if that's what you want to do, because that's what I did. But at some point, I also feel that, hey, I can actually apply what I've learned here, compositionally, technically,
settings,
to something,
understanding the weather.
Home. Yeah. And for me right now, I have this thing where, like, the closer I can get to my childhood home and get an original really good photo, the better. It's completely arbitrary. That nobody else has any relation to that at all, because it's my childhood home. But it's something that means something for me, and it drives me. And I generally find that the photos I'm the most enthusiastic about are those that I can relate to more than just the big epic vistas that I would have enjoyed the most probably 6, 7, 8 years ago. In that way, I definitely feel that throughout the pandemic, I think it helped a lot of photographers, or it forced a lot of photographers out of just thinking Iceland is the place to go to take epic photos. You were forced to being home, you could not travel, so you still have this urge to create, you still have this urge to doing landscape photography. So although the pandemic was hard for a lot of people, in that regard to landscape photography, I think it has been an enormous benefit. Luckily for me, I had discovered Denmark a year prior to the pandemic actually broke out. So I was like, great, I don't need to do workshops. I have released all my all my e-books and Photoshop course. Now I can just go and photograph Denmark and focus on that. And I've enjoyed it so much. Discovered things that I had no idea that I could do or was even possible in Denmark. And I think that is a big part of doing original photography. And I can also see on our list, like you wanted to ask me what is a good photo. I definitely think that all that stuff added together is basically what makes a good photo. It doesn't have necessarily to be only original, but I would definitely say that originality is a big aspect of it, although originality in and of itself does not mean at all that you can commercialize the specific photo and sell the specific photo.
I totally agree. I mean, it's one of the check boxes, but it's how much weight you put on it. Depends on who you are as a person and where you're at in your journey. What's a good photo to me and what's a good photo to somebody else is going to be different, and that's actually really cool.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I remember you had a guy on a few years back where I think the theme was something like objective beauty or something like that. And I think it was something about like the discussions went on like specific, let's say Mesa Arch. Everybody knows Mesa Arch. That would be objectively beautiful. And I was like, what? But on the other hand, I have so often heard that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I'm like, that is used so much to hide behind this being a crap photo, and you will not admit that it's a crap photo. So I obviously, when you think about it, I don't believe that there's something like that you can call objectively beautiful, because that would require that no matter if of us humans are there or not, something would be beautiful. But we are the ones kind of defining what beauty is. So it comes from us.
And it's personal.
Yeah, and it's personal, true. So I kind of feel that I'm more like in the ballpark of what you would call intersubjectivity. It's when you are in a field of professionals per se, or if you just throw it out to like mass psychology, again, like especially 500 pixels back in the days, there was a tendency that it was the same kind of photos that came up to the top in the algorithm. So it's more a democratic process, what beauty is, however we choose to define it. It's a long and deep conversation about aesthetics. But I'm more in the intersubjective way. And obviously that can also be problematic, because us professionals, if we sit down like six, I did that when I did the World Landscape Photography Contest with Nigel. We were seven photographers who had to find the winning photo, and it was 4 against 3. And I was in the minority in that regard. Even though I really enjoyed the one that ended up winning, I still preferred the other one. But at the very least, we figured out together, us 7, to find the photos that we found to be the best ones. But we did it in a democratic way. So I'm much more in the base of it not being completely subjective, as it's only in the beauty is only in the eye of the beholder, but it's definitely not objective either. So I think it's more professional / democratic process.
We just finished judging for the 2024 Natural Landscape Photography Awards, which is a competition I helped create in 2021. And so this is our 4th year. And every year it gets a little bit smoother in terms of the judging process. But when you get to the very end, where you've taken 13,000 photographs and you've distilled it down to like the top 15 in a category, right? Then it's like very subjective. Once you start looking at minor things like, that looks like it might have been dodged a little bit too much, or like, you can see some of the processing flaws that maybe were interjected. And so like photos start to get eliminated based on like really minor things that are sometimes objective, but also some things that are just more subjective, like how it makes you feel, right? Yeah. Like I can remember this year, I think we were trying to decide the winning photo for the intimate landscapes category. And I can remember there was a long conversation about this photo is technically executed masterfully, but it doesn't make me feel anything. That was comments that 3 or 4 of the judges made. And then there was another photo that was like, technically it wasn't as good, but it had so much more feeling and depth and like kind of those unspeakable aspects to it that were hard to describe that ended up making a win, because it's that subjective piece that gets interjected. So it's hard.
Yeah, exactly. And in the end, like distilled down, was it Ansel Adams who said that there's nothing worse than a sharp photo of a fuzzy concept or something like that? And right. I completely agree. Like I don't care what camera brand you're using. I don't care what lens you've used. Is it fine enough in regard to the technicals? Show me what you like. Give me something to look at, something interesting.
Right. Yeah. And I could do a video. We could both have the same amount of followers on YouTube. I could do a video on how to make a photograph that makes you feel something, and you could make a photograph on how to make a photograph that's sharp.
Yeah.
And yours will get way more views.
It will definitely get way more views.
That's funny.
100%.
All right. So maybe a good segue. You started to talk a little bit about your Photoshop courses and your ebooks. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about those and how people can find them.
Yeah, so you can basically just find them through all links on all descriptions on all my videos or my homepage. But yeah, I back in the days when I made my ebooks, I wanted to make them approachable. Like one of the things is that although I've trained as a philosopher and I've read up and down, but one thing you also learn is that philosophers in the 1700s didn't know how to end a sentence, and they just like it's actually a very interesting talk I have with Sophie, my girlfriend, from time to time, because she's all about reading the original words, and of course you should do that, but if you have to distill it down, it's a good idea to distill it down if you have to actually learn what they're trying to say. So in that regard, with my experience in that, I try to make my ebooks very approachable with minimal text and loads of like photo examples as to get to the point fast, and made sure that people actually got through them. And I gotta admit, I am utterly surprised about how well they've been received and how much people enjoy them. I made a follow-up, and I think I can count on one hand over the past, it's been 5 years since I released the first one, who were like, there's not enough text, and I hope that you had also included EXIF data and stuff like that. But besides that, people are really happy about them, and they especially use them. I didn't foresee that they go into the field and they have them on the phone because it's an ebook, so they use it to like, okay, so like a reference thing when they're in the field, so they also work as tools for that, which is great. I did not foresee that. And my Photoshop course, just a massive course. It took me half a year to put it all together. But basically, I just show how I edit my photos, all the different techniques, introduce people to the programs. I've made very sure that I knew that people were probably using Lightroom more than Photoshop back then, and probably still do. So I definitely made sure to give a proper introduction to what the tools photographers use in Photoshop is. I remember at one point I opened Adobe Illustrator, and I was like, what is going on here? So I try to make sure that people don't have that feeling when they open Photoshop. And then I just like give them all my different techniques and tools for different things, and then a lot of like start to finish examples.
That's awesome. Yeah, one of the most frequently asked questions I get on my workshops is, do you know of any really good Photoshop courses? Mm-hmm. And I'm always like, because I haven't taken any. I'm like, I
can send it over and you can see how it is.
Yeah, no, that actually would be cool, because I get asked that question all the time, and it's always like, maybe I should make one, but I'm also like, I know I'm not the best Photoshop practitioner. Like, I know I have bad habits and probably not best practice. So I think anything that people can learn more about Photoshop, the better. So I'm glad that you have that available.
It is still like Lightroom and Camera Raw have got some really, really good upgrades over the years with the masking section now. Wow, it's really, really good. And it has made a lot of the stuff that you do in Photoshop, I won't say obsolete, but you can get away with using the masking tool in Camera Raw and Lightroom often.
Agree.
I use a lot of the... I still edit a lot with luminosity masks and so forth. And obviously, if you want to blend photos together and make time blends and stuff, you have to use Photoshop. There's not really any, or at least a program with layers. I think Affinity Photo can do it too. I've just never used it. It's for me, Photoshop is just another tool in the tool belt, and one I, for the most part, always go through in my editing process. I can almost not imagine it would feel half done if I just finished the photo in Camera Raw. I always get it into Photoshop, save the PSD or PSB file, just make sure to clean it up properly, and add a little bit of sharpening. And
Sounds like we have a very similar workflow.
Yeah, although I don't use Lightroom. I use Camera Raw. I'm completely old school in that regard, like Bridge, Camera Raw, Photoshop. I don't like... I've tried again and again and again to get into Lightroom because I think it's beneficial for me, but I can just not get used to that interface. And I hate that I have to start making catalogs in Lightroom and binding myself to Lightroom. Like my catalogs are on my hard drive. I won't say OCD, but I make sure to have my folders organized properly.
That's fair. We could do a whole podcast on Lightroom versus Bridge, but that's a whole other thing.
Ooh. Yeah.
All right. So my last question for you, who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are some people that we should learn more about?
Well, obviously, I have some really good colleagues. James Popsis, I think you could talk very deep with, and his approach to, well, first landscape photography, and now he's more like into street, human and nature and all that stuff. Nigel Danson, my really good friend and colleague over the past many years. We have quite a similar style. His is probably a little bit more painterly than mine. And another good friend of mine, Jeroen van Nieuwenhoef, I think that's how I pronounce his last name. He's Belgian, who I work with up in Iceland and on other projects. As I mentioned, he really exploded on Instagram with all his volcano stuff. And those three, I would say, are really good to have a conversation with.
Love that. Yeah, Jeroen submitted a lot of images to my competition, I think maybe last year or the year before, and some amazing photography. And then anytime I ever have questions about a drone, Google whatever you're looking for and his name pops up. So he's got it figured out.
He has got it figured out, that's for sure.
Well, Mas, this has been so much fun. I can't believe it took us this long to pull this episode off, but I'm so happy that we did, because you were just delightful to talk to.
Thank you so much, and likewise.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you to Mas for the fun and engaging conversation this week. I had a blast. I only regret taking so long to get you onto the show. It was a true honor, my friend. If you find value in these conversations, please consider supporting the podcast on Patreon. Every single week, I publish the podcast there with questions for you to think about and engage with others in our community on, and membership is free. Of course, paid members are appreciated, and with over 230 bonus episodes available to you, what are you waiting for? I'd really appreciate your support. Just visit patreon.com/fstopandlisten to support the show. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.